Case 1. Kelsey Smith. The summer of 2007 should have been a time of unbridled joy for Kelsey Smith. At just 18 years old, she had graduated from high school, a beacon of hope and promise for the future. Her life, a canvas of endless possibilities, was a source of pride for her parents, Greg and Missy Smith, and a testament to her vibrant and compassionate spirit. But on June 2nd, 2007, a day that started with such normalcy and routine would descend into a living nightmare. Kelsey, a diligent and thoughtful young woman, had a simple errand to run. She wanted to buy a gift for her boyfriend to celebrate their 6-month anniversary. She drove to the Target department store in Overland Park, Kansas, a place she had visited countless times. The store, a symbol of suburban American life, with its bright lights and endless aisles, was a place where people felt safe. But in the quiet corners of the parking lot, a predator was lurking, watching, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The surveillance video from the Target store would later become a key piece of evidence, a silent witness to the final moments of Kelsey's freedom. The video shows her parking her car, a 1987 Buick Regal, and then walking into the store. She is seen on a phone call with her mother, a casual, everyday conversation that would be their last. She buys a present for her boyfriend and then exits the store, her movements a picture of an unsuspecting, happy young woman. But in the parking lot, the narrative shifts. As she walks toward her car, a figure in a white shirt and dark pants is seen following her, a ghost in the background of her carefree existence. The video, when slowed down and enhanced, reveals a horrifying truth. As Kelsey reaches her car, she is violently accosted and forced into her own vehicle. The assault is over in a flash, a brutal and swift act that leaves no witnesses and no sound. The predator, a man named Edwin Hall, a man with a dark history of violence and a sinister fascination with control, had found his prey. Approximately 4 hours after her abduction, Kelsey's car was found abandoned in the parking lot of a nearby Macy's department store. Her purse, wallet, and the gift she had just purchased were all left inside, a chilling sign that this was not a robbery. This was something far more sinister. The police, now with a missing person and an abandoned car, were immediately on high alert. The search for Kelsey began in earnest, but it was a search that was hampered by a bureaucratic obstacle that would soon become the focus of national outrage. The police knew that Kelsey's cell phone was still active, and they believed that they could use the phone's location data to track her. But when they contacted Verizon Wireless, they were met with a wall of bureaucracy. The company, citing privacy concerns, refused to release the cell phone records without a warrant. The detectives, in a race against the clock, knew that the process of getting a warrant would take days that Kelsey did not have. The search for a missing girl who was likely in mortal danger had been stalled by a legal technicality, and the family, the police, and the community were left in a state of helpless frustration. The bureaucratic nightmare that unfolded in the crucial hours following Kelsey's disappearance was a profound source of pain and anger for her family and for the community of Overland Park. The police, bound by legal protocol, were forced to wait while the search for a missing teenager with a ticking clock was stalled. Meanwhile, a different kind of search was underway, one that was not limited by legal documents or corporate policies. The community, led by a grassroots movement of friends and family, mobilized. They became known as Kelsey's Army. Kelsey's Army was a force of nature. Thousands of volunteers, fueled by a collective sense of hope and a shared fear, fanned out across the city and surrounding areas. They hung up posters, knocked on doors, and organized search parties. They used social media, a still nascent technology at the time, to spread the word, creating a digital footprint that extended far beyond the borders of Kansas. The movement was a powerful testament to the community's resolve, but it was a fight against a ghost. They had no idea where to look, and every passing hour chipped away at their hope. While Kelsey's army scoured the streets, the police and the FBI were poring over the scant evidence they had. The surveillance video from Target was a goldmine of information, but the footage of the abduction was blurry and indistinct. They were able to get a better look at Edwin Hall from a security camera at Macy's, which captured a figure in a white shirt and dark pants abandoning Kelsey's car. The grainy images, though, were not enough to make a positive identification. The police released the images to the media, generating hundreds of tips, but none of them led to a direct suspect. The investigation, which was now a full-blown manhunt, was still stuck on the issue of the cell phone records. The FBI, with its vast resources, was also met with resistance from Verizon Wireless. The standoff, which lasted for 4 agonizing days, became a national story. Media outlets across the country reported on the bureaucratic nightmare, and public pressure began to mount on both the company and the government to find a solution. The family, with the help of a local state representative, began to lobby for a new law, a law that would prevent this from ever happening again. The breakthrough in the case came from a completely different direction. A Verizon Wireless technician, moved by the story and the family's plight, decided to help. He had a deep understanding of the company's technology, and without a formal warrant, he was able to provide the police with a ping from Kelsey's phone. The ping, which was not a precise location, but a general area, pointed to a cell phone tower in Grandview, Missouri, about 20 miles from where she had been abducted. The police and the FBI, with this new lead in hand, immediately organized a coordinated search of the area. Within 45 minutes, a search party discovered a horrible truth. In a wooded area near Longview Lake, they found Kelsey's body. The autopsy later confirmed the worst fears of the family. She had been sexually assaulted and strangled to death with her own belt. The hope that had sustained Kelsey's army for 4 days was now replaced by a profound and unutterable grief. The search for a missing person had ended, and the hunt for a killer had begun. The discovery of Kelsey's body was not the end of the story, but the beginning of a relentless pursuit for justice. With the new evidence from the cell phone ping and the overwhelming public pressure, the police and the FBI moved with lightning speed. The focus of the investigation was now on Edwin Hall, the man who had been seen on the surveillance videos and who had a history of violence. Edwin Hall, a 27-year-old married man with a 4-year-old son, was a man who lived a double life. To his family and his community, he was a normal, if somewhat quiet man, but beneath the surface he was a monster. He had a juvenile record of assault and had been returned to state custody after threatening a family member with a knife. He was a man who harbored a deep-seated rage and a sinister fascination with power and control. The police brought Hall in for questioning, and he initially denied everything. He claimed that he had been at the Target store on the night of the murder, but that he had never approached Kelsey. But the detectives were not fooled. They had the evidence from the surveillance videos. They had the cell phone ping that placed him in the area where Kelsey's body was found, and they had a new crucial piece of evidence that linked him directly to the crime, a tire track. The forensic experts at the crime scene had found a distinctive tire track near where Kelsey's body was discovered. They were able to link the track to a specific brand and model of a truck, and a search of Hall's truck revealed a perfect match. The evidence was irrefutable, and under the weight of the mounting evidence, Hall finally broke. He confessed to the kidnapping, the sexual assault, and the murder of Kelsey Smith. In his chilling confession, Hall provided a horrifying account of what had happened. He admitted that he had been at the Target store on the night of the murder and that he had been watching Kelsey. He had seen her talking on her phone, and he had noticed that she was alone. He had then waited for her to leave the store, retrieved his gun from his truck, and then accosted her as she was getting into her car. He had then forced her to drive him to the secluded wooded area near Longview Lake, where he had sexually assaulted and strangled her. The motive, he said, was a perverse desire for possession and control. He saw Kelsey not as a person, but as an object to be used and discarded. Hall's confession provided a sense of closure for the police, but for the Smith family, the pain was just beginning. They had lost a daughter, a beautiful, vibrant young woman with a bright future, to a senseless and brutal act of violence. But in their grief, they found a purpose. They vowed to turn their personal tragedy into a force for positive change, and they began to work on a new law, a law that would honor their daughter's memory and prevent other families from having to go through the same ordeal. The memory of Kelsey Smith, a young woman whose life was so senselessly stolen, became a catalyst for change. Her parents, Greg and Missy Smith, channeled their grief into a powerful campaign for a new law, a law that would prevent the bureaucratic delays that had so tragically hampered the search for their daughter. They called it the Kelsey Smith Act. The Kelsey Smith Act was a landmark piece of legislation that was designed to change the way law enforcement agencies and wireless communication companies interact in missing persons cases. The law, which was signed into effect in Kansas on April 17, 2009, mandates that wireless service providers must provide call location information to law enforcement agencies in emergency situations. The law specifies that if a person is believed to be in danger of death or serious physical harm due to being kidnapped or missing, a warrant is no longer required to obtain the phone's location data. The law was a direct response to the 4 agonizing days of delay that had plagued the search for Kelsey. The Smiths argued, and the government agreed, that in cases of an abduction or a missing person in danger, time is of the essence. The hours and days that are lost waiting for a warrant can mean the difference between life and death. The law also provided legal immunity for wireless companies that complied with the law, removing the fear of lawsuits that had previously been a barrier to cooperation. The success of the Kelsey Smith Act in Kansas was just the beginning. The Smiths, now a force of change in the national conversation about missing persons, began a cross-country campaign to have the law passed in other states. They traveled to state houses and legislative bodies, sharing their daughter's story and lobbying for the passage of the act. Their efforts were met with overwhelming support, and to date, the Kelsey Smith Act, or a similar version of it, has been passed in over 30 states. The Kelsey Smith Act had a profound and immediate impact. It changed the way law enforcement agencies and wireless companies work together, creating a more efficient and responsive system for dealing with missing persons cases. It has been credited with saving countless lives, with police being able to locate missing persons in a matter of hours, not days. The law has also been a powerful symbol of hope, a reminder that even in the face of a profound tragedy, a positive and lasting change can be made. The case of Kelsey Smith was a story of a monster who had hidden in plain sight, a story of a community that had come together in a time of crisis, and a story of a family that had turned their pain into a purpose. But it was also a story of a young woman whose life, though tragically cut short, had a lasting impact, a legacy that would continue to save lives for years to come. The Kelsey Smith Act is a powerful and fitting tribute to her memory, a law that ensures that no family will ever again have to go through the bureaucratic nightmare that her family had to endure. The trial of Edwin Hall, which took place a little over a year after the murder, was a final painful chapter in the story of Kelsey Smith. The courtroom was packed with the media, the community, and most importantly, Kelsey's family and friends. The atmosphere was one of palpable tension, with everyone waiting to see if the man who had taken so much from them would finally face justice. Hall's defense team, in a desperate attempt to avoid a capital murder conviction, tried to argue that the murder was not premeditated, but a crime of passion. They tried to paint a picture of a man who had acted in a moment of rage, a man who was not a cold-blooded killer, but a man who had simply lost control. But the prosecution, with the full weight of the evidence and the chilling details of Hall's confession, was able to prove otherwise. The prosecution presented a meticulous case, detailing every step of Hall's actions on the day of the murder. They showed the jury the surveillance video of him following Kelsey in the Target store, proving that his actions were not spontaneous, but carefully planned. They presented the evidence from the cell phone ping and the tire track, linking him directly to the crime scene. And they played the audio recording of his confession, a chilling account of a man who had acted with a cold and deliberate malice. But the most powerful testimony came from Kelsey's family. Her parents, Greg and Missy Smith, took the stand, their voices filled with a profound and unutterable grief. They spoke of Kelsey, not just as a victim, but as a person. They spoke of her dreams, her hopes, her laughter, and her love. They showed the jury photos of her graduation, a vibrant and beautiful young woman with a future that had been so senselessly stolen from her. Their testimony was not just about the crime, but about the human cost of that crime, a cost that they would have to pay for the rest of their lives. In the end, Hall's defense team, knowing that they could not win, made a deal with the prosecution in exchange for a plea of guilty to all 4 charges of kidnapping, rape, sodomy, and capital murder. The prosecution would not seek the death penalty. Hall would instead be sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The deal was a bitter pill to swallow for the Smith family, but they agreed, knowing that it would spare them the pain of a long and drawn-out trial, and that it would ensure that Hall would never again be a free man. The case of Kelsey Smith was a tragic story of a life cut short, a story that became a cautionary tale for parents and a call to action for lawmakers. But it was also a story of a family's resilience, a community's resolve, and a legacy that would continue to save lives. The Kelsey Smith Act, a powerful and fitting tribute to her memory, is a law that ensures that her death was not in vain. Her story is a reminder that even in the face of a profound tragedy, a positive and lasting change can be made. Case 2. The story of Irene Cortez is a stark reminder that some mysteries refuse to be solved, and that the line between a tragic accident and a sinister plot can become irretrievably blurred. Irene was a Spanish woman, a vibrant and independent soul who had spent years building a successful life as a graphic designer in Madrid. Her passion for her work was matched only by her love for adventure. She was a woman who was always on the move, and she found a particular fascination with the rich and complex tapestry of South America. It was on one of these trips, a journey to Colombia, that her life would take a mysterious and ultimately fatal turn. Irene's trip to Colombia was not just a vacation, it was a pilgrimage of sorts. She was drawn to the country's ancient ruins, its bustling cities, and its breathtaking natural landscapes. She had planned the trip for months, meticulously mapping out her itinerary, from the vibrant streets of Bogotá to the serene coffee plantations of the Eje Cafetero region. But there was another, more personal reason for her visit: to confront the ghost of her past. Years earlier, she had been married to a man named Javier, a successful but controlling entrepreneur who had never been able to handle her independence. The marriage had ended in a bitter and acrimonious divorce, a legal and emotional battle that had left deep scars on both of them. Javier, a man of immense wealth and power, had always believed that he could control every aspect of his life, and Irene's departure was a wound to his ego that had never fully healed. She had heard rumors that he was now living in Colombia, managing a sprawling portfolio of businesses, and she was determined to face him, to finally put the past to rest. Her journey began with the familiar routines of travel, the hurried packing, the long flights, the surreal experience of arriving in a new and foreign land. She checked into a small but elegant boutique hotel in the heart of Bogota, a place that blended old-world charm with modern amenities. The first few days of her trip were filled with a sense of wonder and excitement. She explored the city's historic districts, visited museums, and immersed herself in the local culture. She marveled at the vibrant street art of the La Candelaria neighborhood, feeling a profound connection to the artistic expression that mirrored her own creative spirit. She spent an afternoon at the Gold Museum, where the intricate pre-Columbian artifacts seemed to whisper stories of a forgotten past. The sights, sounds, and smells of Bogota were a sensory feast, a welcome distraction from the quiet dread that lingered at the edges of her mind. But on the third day, a strange and unsettling incident occurred. As she was walking back to her hotel from dinner at a small cafe, she noticed a black car following her. It was a sleek, nondescript vehicle with tinted windows, and it seemed to match her pace, slowing down when she did, and speeding up as she quickened her step. She tried to convince herself that it was a coincidence, that she was just being paranoid, but a cold knot of fear began to form in her stomach. She ducked into a small souvenir shop, pretending to browse, and watched as the car drove slowly past her. The driver's face was a blur behind the dark glass, but she could feel the weight of his gaze. It was a brief and terrifying moment, and she was so shaken that she decided to take a taxi back to her hotel, cutting her evening short. The incident, a small blip in an otherwise pleasant trip, would later take on a much more sinister significance. The following day, Irene tried to shake off the unsettling feeling from the night before. She convinced herself it was a product of her own anxiety, a subconscious manifestation of her apprehension about facing Javier. She spent the day exploring the city, but she couldn't escape the feeling of being watched. She found herself constantly looking over her shoulder, her mind replaying the moment the black car had passed her. She decided to call her sister, Elena, back in Spain and tell her about her strange encounter. Elena, a calm and rational woman, tried to reassure her, telling her that Bogota was a large city and that it was probably just a taxi looking for a fare. But even as she said the words, a sense of foreboding crept into her voice. That evening, Irene made the call she had been dreading. She found Javier's number from an old address book and dialed. The phone rang once, twice, and then a familiar voice answered. His tone was smooth and confident, and for a moment Irene felt a pang of nostalgia, a ghost of the man she had once loved. But the conversation quickly turned cold. She told him that she was in Bogota and that she wanted to see him, to talk about their past, to finally get some closure. His voice, once warm, became clipped and dismissive. He told her that there was nothing to talk about, that their past was in the past, and that she should go back to Spain and leave him alone. The conversation ended with a click, and Irene was left with a sense of cold, unyielding rejection. The last glimmer of hope for a peaceful resolution was now gone. She had come to Colombia seeking a final clean break, but all she had found was a reinforced wall of his control. The next morning, The serene atmosphere of the boutique hotel was shattered by a scene of panic and chaos. Irene had not come down for breakfast, and when a staff member went to check on her, they found the door to her room ajar. The scene inside was a picture of a life that had been violently cut short. Irene's body was found on the floor, and the police were immediately called. The initial report was that she had fallen and hit her head, a tragic accident in a foreign country. But as the detectives began to investigate, they found a number of inconsistencies that raised red flags. The room was not a scene of a struggle. The bed was neatly made, her luggage was still packed, and nothing of value was missing. It was as if she had simply gone to sleep and then, in the middle of the night, had stumbled and fallen. But the forensics told a different story. The autopsy report revealed that the fall had not been the cause of death. Irene had been strangled, her death a deliberate and brutal act. The discovery turned a tragic accident into a full-blown murder investigation, and the Colombian police, now with a high-profile case involving a foreign national, were under immense pressure to find the killer. With the case now a murder investigation, the Colombian police began to retrace Irene's final days. They interviewed the hotel staff, the taxi drivers she had used, and the people she had met at local restaurants and bars. The most crucial piece of information came from the hotel's security footage, which revealed a chilling detail. The footage showed a man in a black suit entering the hotel on the night of the murder. He was a nondescript figure, a ghost in the background of the video, but he had a distinctive scar that ran from his temple to his jawline. He was seen going up to Irene's floor, and then, a few hours later, he was seen leaving the hotel, his face a mask of cold, unreadable emotion. The man was a professional, a ghost who had come and gone without a trace, leaving behind only the cold reality of a life that had been extinguished. The police, with the new evidence from the security footage, began to suspect that Irene's murder was not a random act of violence, but a contracted hit. The motive was still unclear, but the person who had orchestrated the murder was a man with a motive, a man with a history of violence and control. Her ex-husband, Javier. The police, with the new lead, immediately put out a warrant for his arrest, but they soon discovered that he had fled the country, leaving behind his vast network of businesses and his comfortable life. The disappearance of Javier was a de facto confession, a clear sign that he had something to hide. The investigation now spanned 2 continents. The Colombian police, with the help of Interpol, began to work with the Spanish authorities. The Spanish police, now with a new understanding of the events, began to re-examine the financial dealings of Javier's businesses, and what they found was a web of deceit and corruption that extended far beyond the borders of Spain. They discovered a number of shell corporations, a series of offshore bank accounts, and a large number of unexplained transactions. The most damning piece of evidence was a series of wire transfers that had been made to a Colombian bank account in the weeks leading up to Irene's murder. The account was in the name of a man with a long criminal record, a man who was known to be a contract killer, a man who had a distinctive scar that ran from his temple to his jawline. The 2 halves of the investigation, the Colombian and the Spanish, now came together to form a clear and undeniable picture of a crime that was as premeditated as it was brutal. The police now had a clear timeline, a motive, a professional killer, and a mastermind. The ghost who had been seen on the security footage was the killer, a man who had been hired by Javier to end the life of the woman who had dared to defy him. The search for Javier was now a global manhunt. He was a man with a vast network of connections and a seemingly endless supply of money, and he was able to stay one step ahead of the police for months. He used his offshore accounts to fund his escape, moving from country to country, always in a different name, always with a different face. The case, which had once been a high-profile media sensation, began to fade from the headlines. It became another cold case, a ghost in the vast and complex world of international crime. But the police, with a dogged determination, refused to give up. They had a clear picture of Javier's modus operandi, and they knew that he would eventually make a mistake. The break in the case came from a seemingly innocuous source. A small independent bank in a small independent country in the Caribbean had flagged a large and unusual transaction. The transaction, which had been made from a numbered offshore account, was for a large sum of money to a small private hospital in a small independent country in the Caribbean. The police, with the new lead, immediately sent a team of investigators to the island. What they found was a man who had gone into hiding, not just from the law, but from his own body. Javier, a man who had once been so proud of his physical appearance, was now a ghost of his former self. He had undergone extensive plastic surgery in an attempt to change his appearance, but a small persistent scar on his temple had refused to heal. The scar, a remnant of a childhood accident, was a perfect match for the man who had been seen on the security footage from the hotel in Bogota. The police now had their man, and the ghost of Irene's murderer was finally brought to justice. The trial of Javier, which took place a year after his capture, was a global media event. He was a man who had everything: wealth, power, and influence, but he had lost it all to a deep-seated need for control. The prosecution, with the full weight of the evidence from 2 continents, was able to paint a clear and undeniable picture of a man who had acted not out of a moment of madness, but out of a cold and deliberate malice. They showed the jury the security footage from the hotel, the wire transfers, and the evidence from his plastic surgery. The case was a slam dunk, a clear and undeniable picture of a crime that was as premeditated as it was brutal. The most powerful testimony came from Irene's sister, Elena. She spoke of her sister, not just as a victim, but as a person. She spoke of her independence, her spirit, and her love for adventure. She showed the jury photos of her sister's travels, her art, and her life, a vibrant and beautiful woman with a future that had been so senselessly stolen from her. Her testimony was not just about the crime, but about the human cost of that crime, a cost that she and her family would have to pay for the rest of their lives. In the end, Javier was found guilty of first-degree murder and was sentenced to life in a maximum security prison in Colombia. The verdict was a sense of closure for the Cortez family, but it was a closure that was tinged with a profound and unutterable grief. They had lost a sister, a daughter, a friend, a woman who had been so full of life, and all they had left was a story of a mystery that had been solved, but a story that would forever be a part of their lives. The case of Irene Cortez was a tragic story of a life cut short, a story that became a cautionary tale about the dangers of a controlling personality and the insidious nature of power. But it was also a story of a family's resilience, a community's resolve, and a legacy that would continue to inspire people to fight for justice. The ghost of Irene's murderer was finally brought to justice, but the memory of her vibrant life would forever be a part of the stories that were told, a story of a woman who had dared to live her life on her own terms, and a story of a family that had fought to get her the justice she deserved. Case 3. In the bustling, ancient heart of Istanbul, where Europe meets Asia and history whispers from every stone, a vibrant life was tragically extinguished. Sarai Sierra, a 33-year-old mother of 2 from Staten Island, New York, embarked on a solo journey that was meant to be a creative pilgrimage. An amateur photographer with a profound passion for capturing the world through her lens, she saw Istanbul not just as a city, but as a living canvas. This was her first trip outside the United States, a bold step born of a quiet longing to explore and challenge herself. But what began as an inspiring adventure would devolve into an international tragedy, a harrowing mystery that captivated two nations and left a family shattered. The year was 2013, and for Sarai, the trip was more than a vacation. A friend had originally planned to join her, but a last-minute cancellation due to financial constraints left Sarai with a choice: abandon the dream or seize it alone. She chose the latter, driven by a determination that her family knew well. Sarai was a devout woman, deeply committed to her husband, Stephen, and her two young sons aged 9 and 11. Her life was rooted in her faith and her family, yet she possessed an adventurous spirit that longed to break free, if only for a few weeks. The purpose of her trip was clear: to immerse herself in street photography, to capture the raw, unfiltered essence of Istanbul, Amsterdam, and Munich for a personal project. She was an avid user of Instagram, using her phone and iPad to document her journey, sharing her progress with a global community of fellow photographers. She saw the world in squares and filters, and this trip was her chance to fill her gallery with images that were entirely her own. Sarai arrived in Istanbul on January 7th, a new year and a new beginning. She checked into a modest hostel in the historic Beyoğlu district, a place known for its artistic energy and bustling streets. Her days were a blur of creative exploration. She wandered through the Grand Bazaar, a labyrinth of color and sound, her camera clicking away at the intricate lanterns and bustling merchants. She captured the stunning architecture of the Blue Mosque, the Hagia Sophia, and the Topkapi Palace, marveling at the juxtaposition of ancient grandeur and modern life. Her photographs, uploaded daily to Instagram, were a testament to her talent and her joy. She was in constant contact with her family back home, a lifeline of text messages and phone calls that reassured her loved ones that she was safe and thriving. "This is what I did today," she would tell her mother, Betsaida Jimenez, her voice filled with a childlike wonder. The family's initial anxieties about her traveling alone had been replaced by a shared excitement for her journey. On January 21st, the day she was scheduled to fly home, the communication stopped. Sarai had last told her family she planned to visit the iconic Galata Bridge, a place where fishermen lined the railings and the city's two halves met over the shimmering waters of the Golden Horn. It was a photographer's dream, a final perfect shot before heading to the airport. Her father, Dennis Jimenez, waited for hours at Newark Liberty International Airport, a gnawing dread growing in his stomach with every passing minute. She never checked into her flight. Her husband, Stephen, called her hostel in Istanbul, only to be told that Sarai's passport, chargers, and other personal items were still in her room, as if she had just stepped out for a moment, but she never returned. The disappearance of Sari Sierra triggered a massive international response. Her family, with the help of a U.S. congressman, reached out to the State Department and the FBI. Within days, her husband and brother, David Jimenez, were on a plane to Istanbul, determined to join the search. The Turkish police, a force of over 1,000 officers, launched a massive manhunt, combing the city's labyrinthine streets and ancient alleyways. They reviewed hours of CCTV footage, capturing a ghostly image of Sarai in a shopping mall, checking her email on her iPad before her last known sighting near the Galata Bridge. The search became a global spectacle, a high-stakes drama playing out on the world stage. However, the media coverage, particularly in Turkey, took a dark turn. Instead of focusing on the search for a missing mother, certain outlets began a campaign of victim blaming. Rumors spread like wildfire. Why was she traveling alone? What was a mother of two doing in a shady neighborhood? Was she a drug courier, a spy? The fact that she had made side trips to Amsterdam and Munich was used as proof of a secret criminal life. The Istanbul police chief was forced to publicly state she was just a tourist in an attempt to quell the baseless speculation. Sarai's family and friends were horrified by the narrative, which suggested that her death was a consequence of her own reckless behavior. It was a cruel and unjust character assassination, turning a vibrant woman into a cautionary tale. 12 days after she was last seen, the search came to a tragic end. On February 2nd, Sarai's body was discovered hidden near the remnants of Istanbul's ancient city walls, in a desolate, secluded area of the Kankırtaran neighborhood. Her head had been fatally struck by a blunt object, likely a rock. The autopsy revealed no signs of sexual assault, but a different, more chilling story began to emerge from the forensic evidence. DNA samples from under her fingernails were a crucial piece of the puzzle, a sign that she had fought valiantly against her attacker. The discovery brought a somber closure for her family, a relief from the torturous uncertainty, but it also brought a profound and unutterable grief. "At least we have closure," her mother said, her voice heavy with sorrow. The investigation now shifted from a missing persons case to a murder hunt. The DNA evidence was a vital clue, and the Turkish authorities, with the assistance of the FBI, began a meticulous search for a match. The profile led them to a homeless man known to frequent the area where Sarai's body was found. His name was Ziya Tasalli, a 46-year-old scrap paper collector with no fixed address. He had a history of petty crime and drug use, often inhaling paint thinner to get high. The police detained his siblings and took DNA samples, which provided a close match to the evidence found on Sarai's body. Tasalli, however, had vanished. He was on the run, believed to be hiding near the border with Syria, a desolate and dangerous no-man's land. The manhunt, which had begun for Sarai, now turned its focus on her killer. For a month, Tasalli evaded capture, a ghost flitting between the shadows of two nations. But his luck ran out on March 17th. He was arrested near the Turkey-Syria border, attempting to re-enter Turkey. He was brought to Istanbul, where he was interrogated and confessed to the murder. In his confession, he claimed the attack was a random drug-fueled act of violence. He said he had approached Salih and attempted to kiss her while under the influence of paint thinner vapors. When she resisted and struck him with her phone, he totally lost control, pushing her to the ground and striking her with a rock. He denied the accusations of sexual assault, a claim that was later substantiated by the autopsy report. He was charged with murder and ordered to remain in custody until his trial. The trial of Ziya Tasalli was a media spectacle, a final act in a devastating drama. The prosecution sought a life sentence for murder, along with additional years for sexual assault and theft, though the latter charges were largely based on early speculation. During the trial, Tasalli's defense lawyer argued that his client was not capable of grasping the meaning and results of his actions, suggesting a plea of insanity. The court ordered a mental health evaluation, a common legal maneuver in such cases. The trial dragged on, with the Sierra family following the proceedings from afar, their grief now compounded by the cold, slow grind of the judicial system. In the end, justice was served. Ziya Tasalli was found guilty of Sarai Sierra's murder and sentenced to life in prison. The verdict brought a sense of finality to a story that had been filled with so much pain and uncertainty. But for the Sierra family, the conclusion of the trial was not an end, but a beginning. They now had to navigate a life without Sarai, a future where her vibrant presence was only a memory. They buried her in a cemetery on Staten Island, a final somber act of love and farewell. Her husband, Stephen, spoke of the plans and dreams they would never fulfill. "My heart especially goes out to my 2 sons," he said. "Now they won't grow up with this amazing woman." The legacy of Sarai Sierra is a complex and enduring one. In her death, she became a symbol of a traveler's vulnerability, a cautionary tale for those who dare to venture into the unknown. But for those who knew her, and for the countless people whose hearts were touched by her story, she remains a testament to the power of a life lived with passion and purpose. Her photographs, which her family sold to help cover funeral expenses and support her sons, are a lasting monument to her spirit. They are images of a world seen through her eyes, the golden light of an Istanbul sunset, the intricate details of a mosque's dome, the bustling energy of a city alive with possibility. They are a poignant reminder of the life she lived, a life that was so much more than a news story, a life that was full of light, love, and a quiet, unyielding courage. The case of Sarai Sierra is a somber chapter in the annals of international crime, a story of a dream that ended in darkness. But it is also a story of a family's faith, a community's support, and the enduring power of a woman's artistic vision, a vision that, even in death, continues to shine. Case 4. In the grand theater of human existence, the stage is often set in places we deem sacrosanct. The halls of a hospital, with their polished floors and hushed tones, are meant to be a sanctuary, a last bastion against the relentless march of mortality. We enter these spaces with an implicit understanding. Here, the sick are tended to, the suffering is eased, and the trust between caregiver and patient is an unbreakable vow. But in the late 20th century, this sacred stage was usurped by a predator who wore the uniform of a healer. His name was Donald Harvey, and for nearly 2 decades, he cast a long, cold shadow over the lives of the vulnerable, earning a moniker as chilling as his deeds, the Angel of Death. This is not merely a biography. It is a meticulous deconstruction of a monster, a deep dive into the psychological wounds that festered into a pathological need for power, and a grim account of how a broken boy became one of America's most prolific serial killers. The first act of this tragedy unfolds not in a hospital, but in the desolate landscapes of rural America, where poverty and neglect are silent assassins. Intaut, rustic Kentucky home, 1950s-1960s. The air in the small Appalachian home is a thick, suffocating blanket of tension. Young Donald Harvey, a child with an unreadable expression, is the silent observer of a life that is unraveling before it can even begin. He is the eldest of 3, but the role of protector or leader is a fantasy. His father, Ray Harvey, a struggling tobacco farmer, is a constant looming threat. Ray's cruelty is a quiet psychological torture, a slow drip of poison. He calls Donald feminine names, ridicules his sensitive nature, and chips away at his sense of self-worth with a cold, methodical precision. The verbal abuse is a constant background hum to a life steeped in struggle. His mother, Goldie, is a ghost in her own home, a woman emotionally absent and unable to shield her son from his father's vitriol. Donald, a child who craves validation and love, finds only scorn and a profound, gnawing loneliness. The home is a cage, but the world outside offers no escape. From the age of 5, Donald becomes the victim of sexual abuse at the hands of his Uncle Wayne and an older neighbor, Dan Thomas. These are not isolated incidents. They are a grim, recurring nightmare that spans a decade and a half. The abuse is a violation of the most fundamental kind, and it shapes Donald's worldview. He learns that his body is not his own, that he is an object to be used, and that power is something wielded by those who are stronger. He takes the small amounts of money Dan gives him, a gesture that he later rationalizes as a form of payment, but which is really a transaction steeped in shame. The trauma burrows deep, hardening into a core of resentment and a pathological need to reclaim the power that was so brutally stolen from him. He is a study in contrasts, a quiet, introverted boy who secretly longs for attention. He drops out of school but obtains a GED, a flicker of ambition in a life marked by aimlessness. He attempts to join the Air Force, a desperate bid for structure and escape, but his internal demons prove too powerful. He suffers 2 nervous breakdowns, attempts suicide, and is honorably discharged. The world he knows has no place for him. He is adrift, a vessel of unacknowledged pain, until he finds a new harbor in an unexpected place, a hospital. NT. Marymount Hospital, London, Kentucky, 1970. Donald, now a seemingly clean-cut and polite 18-year-old, finds a job as an orderly at Marymount Hospital. The irony is lost on no one but him. He, who had been a victim of constant violation and powerlessness, is now in a position of authority over the sick and the dying. He is a caretaker, a position of trust, and the perfect camouflage for the monster he is about to become. His first victim is Logan Evans, an 88-year-old stroke patient, a man as helpless as Donald felt for most of his life. Evans, weakened by his illness, is incontinent, and during a routine cleaning, he inadvertently smears feces on Donald. In that moment, all the years of abuse, the humiliation, and the feeling of being treated as something dirty and worthless come crashing down on Donald. He is no longer the orderly. He is the boy being shamed, and his rage is a consuming fire. He acts not out of mercy, but out of a desperate, violent need for control. He smothers Evans with a pillow and a plastic bag, the act clumsy and fueled by pure, unadulterated fury. He listens with a stethoscope as the man's heart gives its final terrible beat. In that moment of death, Donald doesn't feel remorse. He feels power. He has reversed the dynamic. He is no longer the victim. He is the one who decides. This first murder is a Pandora's box, unleashing a torrent of violence. Over the next 10 months at Marymount, he kills at least a dozen more patients. His methods are initially varied and haphazard, a reflection of his chaotic state of mind. He cuts off the oxygen supply to Elizabeth Wyatt, a 42-year-old cancer patient, and drowns Eugene McQueen, a 43-year-old, in his own fluids by turning him on his back. But the game is evolving. The killer is becoming an artisan of death. He begins a relationship with a married undertaker, Vernon Midden. Unbeknownst to Vernon, he is providing a crucial part of Donald's dark education. Vernon, with his intimate knowledge of the human body and the art of embalming, provides Donald with a chilling understanding of how to kill without leaving a trace. He learns about the subtle signs of death, the ways a body reacts to different types of trauma. Donald is a diligent student, absorbing every detail and applying it to his own macabre work. The mercy he claims to be delivering is a self-serving lie, a convenient rationalization for a deep-seated God complex. In that, Cincinnati, VA, Medical Hospital and Drake Memorial Hospital, 1975, the stage shifts from rural Kentucky to the bustling medical centers of Cincinnati. Donald, now in his 20s, works as an orderly and later an autopsy assistant, positions that grant him unparalleled access to the vulnerable and to the tools of death. For a decade, he is a ghost in the machine, a silent killer who leaves no obvious footprints. He is, to all outward appearances, a model employee, quiet, respectful, and dedicated. He is the last person anyone would ever suspect. His methods become a macabre science. He moves from clumsy suffocation to the meticulous application of poisons. His arsenal is extensive and terrifyingly creative. Cyanide, arsenic, insulin, morphine, and even rat poison. He administers these poisons in the most mundane of ways, hiding them in food, juice, IV drips, and gastric feeding tubes. The victims are a mix of the truly sick and those who simply inconvenience him. He kills Virgil Weddle with rat poison in his pudding and Doris Nally with cyanide in her apple juice. He kills Claiborne Kendrick, a man recovering from a head injury, by slipping cyanide into his gastric tube. A diary entry would later reveal that he delayed the murder to allow Kendrick's wife to go on a planned vacation, a grotesque act of twisted benevolence. The mercy-killing narrative he presents to the world and to himself is a flimsy shield. While some of his victims are indeed terminally ill, many others are not. They are simply people who annoyed him, who required too much of his time, or who were a means to an end. The pleasure he derives is not from ending suffering, but from exercising absolute power. He is the master of life and death, and in the sterile world of the hospital, he can play God without consequence. His killing spree is not confined to the hospital. His pathology seeps into his personal life. When he suspects his lover, Carl Huvuler, of infidelity, he doesn't kill him, but instead poisons him with arsenic to make him too ill to leave their apartment. It is a sadistic act of control, a perversion of love. He then poisons Carl's father, Henry, a man who had done him no harm, and a neighbor, Helen Metzger, by putting arsenic in her pie. He has become a cold, calculating killer who sees everyone around him as either a pawn or an obstacle. The sheer volume of deaths surrounding him should have raised alarms, but in the chaotic, high-turnover environment of a busy hospital, these deaths are often attributed to natural causes. The victims are often elderly and frail, their demise tragically unremarkable. The system is not designed to look for monsters and scrubs. It is designed to assume the best intentions of its caregivers. Campion Police Interrogation Room, 1987. The tide turns with the death of John Powell, a patient at Drake Memorial Hospital. His death is unexpected, and the doctors, perplexed, order an autopsy. The medical examiner, during the procedure, is struck by a faint but unmistakable scent of bitter almonds, the chemical signature of cyanide. This is no natural death. This is murder. The police begin to investigate, and the trail of death, like a grim breadcrumb trail, leads directly to Donald Harvey. He is brought in for questioning, a man seemingly unruffled by the accusations. He is calm, cooperative, and disconcertingly knowledgeable about toxicology. He knows too much. The police search his apartment and find a hidden stash of poisons, including cyanide and arsenic. The game is up. In a marathon, multi-day interrogation, Donald Harvey begins to talk. He confesses to a single murder, then two, then a dozen. The number climbs at a dizzying pace. He details each crime with a chilling, boyish charm, recalling the names of his victims, the methods he used, and the circumstances surrounding each death. He confesses to killing 24 people in Ohio and later pleads guilty to an additional 9 in Kentucky. The final tally of his confirmed victims is 37, but he would later boast that the true number was closer to 87. For the first time in his life, he is the center of attention, and he revels in the power of his monstrous legacy. The Angel of Mercy is revealed to be a cold, calculating killer who, in the words of a prosecutor, killed because he liked to kill. Int Courtroom, 1987. The courtroom is a maelstrom of grief and anger. Families of the victims, who had mourned their loved ones as victims of natural causes, now learn the horrifying truth. Their loved ones were not at peace. They were murdered by a man they trusted. In a plea deal to avoid the death penalty, Donald Harvey pleads guilty to all charges. He is sentenced to 28 consecutive life sentences, a number that ensures he will never see the light of day as a free man. Donald Harvey's case sends a shockwave through the healthcare industry and the public consciousness. It brings to light a terrifying and previously little-known phenomenon, the healthcare serial killer, or angel of death. These individuals, often in positions of trust and authority, exploit their access to vulnerable patients and medical supplies to fulfill a variety of dark desires. Harvey's case is a stark and unsettling reminder that evil can hide in plain sight behind a friendly smile and a hospital ID badge. His story is woven into a grim tapestry of other healthcare serial killers, a chilling brotherhood of betrayal. There is Harold Shipman, a British doctor who is believed to have killed over 200 of his patients, and Charles Cullen, an American nurse who confessed to 29 murders, but is suspected of having killed as many as 400. Their crimes expose a fundamental flaw in the systems we rely on to protect us. The very nature of a hospital, the high death rate, the vulnerability of the patients, the chaos and stress of the environment, creates the perfect cover for a predator. These killers operate in the shadows, their crimes often going undetected for years, forcing us to confront the uncomfortable truth that the person who is supposed to be saving a life may in fact be the one taking it. Into Toledo Correctional Institution, 2017, the final act of Donald Harvey's life is a brutal, ironic twist. After decades behind bars, a forgotten man who had long faded from public memory, he is found severely beaten in his prison cell. The man who had been the master of life and death, who meticulously plotted the demise of so many, meets his end not in a peaceful hospital bed, but on a cold prison floor. He dies 2 days later from blunt trauma. His killer, a fellow inmate named James Elliott, is charged and convicted. The man who craved control above all else dies in a manner completely beyond his control. His violent end is a grim, poetic final chapter to a life of murder and deceit, a life that began in powerlessness and ended in a sudden violent finality. Case 5, in the city of Cincinnati, where the Ohio River unspooled its silver ribbon of history, the spaces between life and death were a bustling, continuous current. For most, these were the hospital corridors, the quiet rooms of convalescence, and the loud, frantic moments of a medical crisis. But for Dr. Alistair Finch, the true borderlands lay in the Hamilton County morgue, a place of profound and immutable stillness. He was a man whose life's work was the translation of silence, a quiet savant who spoke the language of the dead with a fluency that bordered on reverence. The world saw him as a professional in a grim profession. In truth, he was a philosopher in a grim temple, searching for the final, unvarnished truth in the intricate calligraphy of a human body. The first whisper came not from a voice, but from a body. A man named John Powell, whose death at Drake Memorial Hospital had been summarily dismissed as natural. The paperwork, a tidy stack of official documents, described a man in his mid-40s with a complex medical history, a heart that had simply given out. The case was a formality, a final, unceremonious act in a life that had run its course. But as Finch began his routine work, a cold, methodical dance with the finality of a human life, he sensed a discord. His senses, honed over decades of quiet observation, were not a tool, but an extension of his being. He saw the subtle blue in the sclera, a cyanotic tinge that suggested a lack of oxygen in the blood, an inconsistency with the reported cause of death. And then he caught it, a faint, almost imperceptible scent in the cold, sterile air, a ghostly aroma of bitter almonds. It was a scent that not everyone could perceive, but to Finch it was a scream, a chemical signature of a deliberate, violent act. He paused, the scalpel held motionless in his gloved hand. This was not a routine case. This was an act of profound and quiet violence. He was a man who believed in the undeniable logic of data, and the data before him was a glaring contradiction. He thought of the other two cases, men who had died in the same hospital ward within weeks of each other, whose bodies had been hastily and quietly transferred to a private morgue with no full autopsy or toxicology report performed. The odds of 3 seemingly natural deaths in such a tight window in the same ward were to Finch an astronomical impossibility. It was a pattern, a meticulously woven tapestry of deceit, and the thread he held in his hand was made of cyanide. His initial findings were met with skepticism, a dismissive shrug from a police department more accustomed to the visceral chaos of a gunshot or a knife wound than the quiet malice of poison. The police chief, an old friend who respected Finch's work but was wary of his obsessive nature, looked at him with a mixture of concern and disbelief. "Alistair," he had said, his voice a low, placating rumble, "one body is not enough to send the entire city into a panic. We can't just go into a hospital and start pointing fingers. The families, the press, it's a powder keg." But Finch was not to be swayed. He was a man who saw the truth in silence, and he knew that Powell's body was a part of a larger story. He began his quiet war against the tide of institutional inertia, poring over old case files, some dating back a decade, searching for the same subtle, unexplained symptoms. He worked late into the night, the only light in the cavernous morgue coming from his desk lamp, illuminating a meticulously organized collection of documents, timelines, correlations between deaths and specific staff schedules, and his own hand-drawn diagrams of the human body with notes scribbled in the margins. He was building a case, not for a court of law, but for a world that refused to listen. His lonely quest found an unlikely partner in Detective Lena Reyes, a woman of action and sharp, intuitive thinking who had been assigned to the case as a matter of formality. She was initially skeptical, a woman who believed in tangible leads and a clear chain of evidence, but as she watched Finch work, with his quiet intensity and his unwavering conviction, she began to see the world through his eyes. He showed her the old autopsy reports, the unexplained cardiac arrests, the sudden respiratory failures, and the deaths that were too easily explained away as natural. The pattern, once invisible, began to take on a terrifying clarity. They were no longer just a medical examiner and a detective. They were a team, 2 solitary figures united by a shared obsession with a ghost that was haunting the city's hospitals. Their investigation led them to the Veterans Administration Medical Center, where Donald Harvey had worked for over a decade. Finch, with his encyclopedic knowledge of toxicology, and Reyes, with her methodical approach to a criminal investigation, began to connect the dots. They discovered a pattern of deaths that mirrored the ones at Drake Memorial, a chilling signature of a predator who had been operating undetected for years. The hospital's records, once a jumble of medical jargon and patient information, became a roadmap of Harvey's quiet violence. They found instances where patients had been given rat poison in their pudding, arsenic in their soup, and cyanide in their orange juice. Harvey was not a clumsy killer. He was an artist of death, a man who had refined his craft over 2 decades, turning his murderous impulses into a macabre science. As the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place, the pressure on Finch and Reyes intensified. The hospital's administration, fearing a public relations nightmare, resisted their investigation, accusing Finch of overreach and Reyes of a witch hunt. The police department, under pressure from City Hall, urged them to back down, to let the case go. But Finch was not a man who could turn away from a truth once he had seen it. His obsession had taken on a life of its own, consuming his every waking moment. He would go home to an empty apartment, the silence a stark contrast to the cacophony of the dead he carried in his mind. He would spend hours with old photographs of the victims, their faces a gallery of forgotten lives, their stories a haunting chorus of injustice. The case took a deeply personal turn when Finch's former mentor, a kind and gentle man who had been in a long-term care facility, suddenly and inexplicably died. The death was ruled natural, a sad but expected end to a long illness. But Finch, with a cold certainty that was both a blessing and a curse, knew better. He had seen the subtle signs, the faint whisper of a chemical signature, and he knew that his mentor, a man who had taught him the reverence for life, had become a victim of the very monster he was hunting. The quiet, academic pursuit had become a deeply personal vendetta, a righteous fury that fueled his every move. With the evidence mounting, Reyes and Finch finally had enough to get a search warrant for Donald Harvey's home. The search was a dark treasure trove of a killer's life. They found medical supplies, a terrifying assortment of poisons, including cyanide and arsenic, and a diary. The diary was not a confession in the traditional sense, but a chillingly detailed record of his work. It was a chronicle of his murders, a detached, almost scientific log of his methods, his victims, and the date of their deaths. There was no remorse in its pages, only a cold, methodical pride in a job well done. It was the final devastating piece of the puzzle, the missing link between the quiet orderly and the prolific serial killer. The interrogation of Donald Harvey was a psychological chess match. He was brought in, a man in his mid-30s with a boyish charm and a calm, polite demeanor that seemed to defy the monstrous acts he had committed. He sat across from Reyes and Finch, his hands folded neatly in his lap, answering their questions with a disarming calmness. He denied everything at first, a master of a narrative he had been perfecting for 20 years. But Finch, with his relentless knowledge of the forensic evidence, and Reyes, with her piercing questions, slowly began to chip away at his facade. The turning point came when Finch showed him a photograph of a body, one of his victims from years ago. Finch pointed out the subtle, almost invisible details of the death, the nuances that only a medical examiner could have seen. In that moment, Harvey realized he was no longer talking to a routine detective. He was talking to a man who spoke the language of his victims, a man who had seen the truth in the silence. The confession, once it began, was a torrent. Harvey, a man who had lived a lifetime of repressed powerlessness and abuse, found a strange release in the telling of his crimes. He talked for hours, his voice a calm, monotonous drone, detailing murder after murder, a chilling recitation of names, dates, and methods. He spoke of his first kill in rural Kentucky, an act of rage born from humiliation, and of the hundreds of murders he claimed to have committed, a monstrous legacy that stunned even the most hardened detectives. He was not a man driven by mercy, but by a pathological need for power and control, a dark god in the sterile world of the hospital. In the aftermath, the morgue, a place of quiet finality, became a place of frantic, sorrowful activity. The bodies of Harvey's victims, once anonymous figures of death, were brought in for re-examination. They were no longer natural deaths, but evidence of a monstrous betrayal. Finch stood over them, a quiet sentinel, his eyes filled with a sad, profound understanding. He had not become a hero in the traditional sense, but he had done something more enduring. He had given a voice to the in-betweeners, to those who could not tell their own stories. His quiet, relentless obsession had unearthed a truth that no one wanted to believe, a truth that shattered the city's sense of security and forced a conversation about the darkness that can hide in plain sight. Alistair Finch's victory was a quiet, lonely one, a testament to a man who, in the silent, cold world of the morgue, had found a profound and unwavering purpose in listening to the dead. The echoes of Harvey's evil would forever linger, a haunting reminder of the darkness that can hide behind a friendly smile and a hospital ID badge.